Hello, the purpose of this video will be to demonstrate and show in a live demo the migration from ThinManager Activation to FactoryTalk Activation. Before we get started, there's a few things I'd like to cover on a single slide before I go through our demonstration. The primary catalog numbers that customers will be ordering in the software portal are going to be what we see here. In the example of the perpetual software with 8x5 maintenance, we'll notice that the customer is buying the 9541M TMFT11, and then if redundancy is included, the 9541M TMUT11. These are going to be the catalog numbers that will be shown in the software portal. When you receive your activation certificate, you're going to be shown the same number. However, when we install the software, there's going to be a feature name. That's what we're going to see in FactoryTalk Activation. The TM FLX XLR is going to be for the base license. So that's going to be for our VFlex license. That's what we're going to install on our primary server. If we've opted for a redundant solution, we're going to install the TM FLX XLR SEC for secondary. That's going to get installed onto our secondary or redundant server. Please note also that the feature names that you should expect to see on your primary and secondary server should be the same using the VFlex model, regardless of the support entitlement being 8x5 or 24x7, as well as regardless of this being a subscription or perpetual versus maintenance model. That feature name that you should expect to see activate the software in FactoryTalk Activation is going to be identical. So let's take a look at actually going through the process of installing our new FactoryTalk Activation and migrating from the ThinManager Activation that we had previously in our system to FactoryTalk Activation. It's a couple of answer IDs that you'll find extremely helpful and that have documented the process that I'll walk through in the video here today. You get the question answer 41542 on how to activate ThinManager with FactoryTalk Activation. And then we've got IN 10630 for managing and activating ThinManager VFlex licensing. So what we'll do is I'm going to go ahead and switch to an environment to show you how to actually go about doing the installation. I've got a redundant system where there is ThinManager synchronized across a remote desktop server 1 and remote desktop server 2. I can see that these are in a synchronized pair where the RDS1 is my primary server and RDS2 is my replica. I'll also notice that when I look at the license mode, I have ThinManager Master License Activation selected. This option to select the activation mode was added starting at version 11. You'll see here in our demonstration, we're running version 12. So version 11 and later will support FactoryTalk Activation. You'll also see here that I'm fully licensed with a ThinManager Activation. If I were to switch my license mode here, you would see that I do not have any available activation. So that's where we're going to start today. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to get my FactoryTalk Activation product keys and serial numbers. This is going to be what's delivered to me. I've got mine both here. I'll be using temporary activations today, but the process will be the same for a production license. So you see here, I have a product key and a serial number that I'll be using to go through the demonstration. I am going to be installing FactoryTalk Activations on a non-internet connected system. So I'll need to use another image that has the same version or newer of FactoryTalk Activation Manager running that has internet connectivity. So the first thing that I'm going to need to do is to say that I need to get the binding files because I need to get new activations on my RDS1 and RDS2 servers. That's my primary and secondary ThinManager installation. And as you remember, we're going to install those licenses independently. First thing that I'm going to need to do is go into Get New Activations on my ThinManager offline FactoryTalk Activation Manager system. And I'm going to need to start the process by specifying a data file. So we'll go ahead and get bindings. I'll place those bindings somewhere on my local machine, and I'm going to use those again when I go to my offline FactoryTalk or my online FactoryTalk Activation Manager system. So we're going to repeat the same process on both servers because I'm going to need a binding file for my primary server and my secondary server. So again, I'll specify that. I'm going to modify the name this time. I'm going to go ahead and create data file. That'll create a data file, and that'll dump that on the desktop of both of my servers for me. we're going to use that in future steps. So I'll need to move that off of these images to a place that I can use them. I'm going to switch to another machine. This machine does have internet access. It will be used to copy my activations. However, this is not part of the environment that I was just looking at. It's on a totally separate host, but it will provide us the capability to get the activations that we need. So what I'm going to do is on my internet connected system, I'm going to click Get New Activations. This is where I'm going to specify the product key and serial number. So in this case, I'm going to say this is the product key and serial number for my VFlex license. I can add another and say, here is my redundancy companion license. This will be the product key and serial number for my redundancy companion license for the VFlex licensing. So I'm going to go ahead and hit validate activations. This will make a connection out to the internet. It's going to prompt us, how many do we want to download? This will be a critical piece when we're using the VFlex licensing model. Notice that I'm entitled to 10 licenses. I need to make the decision, how many of the VFlex ThinManager licenses do I want to bring onto that system that we were just looking at? By default, only a single quantity is going to be selected. In this case, let's say I want to bring over 8 of my FactoryTalk activation licenses, leaving 2 in a pool that will remain that I could use on another system. The next piece that'll be critical here is that I don't want to use the binding on this computer. I want to use the binding on a destination computer. Once we have the correct bindings set for both our primary and redundant license, we're going to save those to this computer. So I'm going to go ahead and download my activations at this point. Once those activations are downloaded, again, I am on my online system that's not part of the environment that I wish to activate. I'm going to need to copy those activations from my online system back over to my offline. So I'll be able to see the file location. I can click directly from in FactoryTalk Activation Manager. I can copy my files and move those to a location where they'll be able to be used. The next step will be to return to our offline system and install the FactoryTalk Activation instances. First, we're going to bring the activations into FactoryTalk Activation Manager. Then we'll go about installing them into ThinManager. So the first thing I'm going to do is select the Get New Activations again for a second time on my primary and secondary remote desktop servers. So I'll hit the Get New Activations. This time I've already downloaded the activation file and I need to move them to this computer. I'm going to go ahead and specify the file location of which of wherever I installed that license, or copied the license, I should say, from my online system, and that's just going to be my desktop. So I'll go ahead and specify the desktop as the location that I placed that file. With the activation selected, we'll go ahead and move on to the next server, which is the secondary server. Again, we're going to hit Get New Activations. I'm going to say Get More Activations. I've already downloaded the activation file. I know the location of that on my desktop. Specify that location. We'll select Move Files. We'll move those current code meter activations. And I should now see that I have those available activations when I refresh my activation server for ThinManager now listed. So here's the licenses that we just pulled today, 2, 3. Again, this will be on the secondary server. So I have my FLX XLR SEC license. I'll see that I have a total of 8 available, which means that license is still available or entitled to 2 more licenses in FactoryTalk Activation Manager for another system. What we'll need to do now is actually install and tell ThinManager that we're going to use the FactoryTalk activation. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to open ThinManager. I'm going to go to the Manage tab, ThinManager server list, and I'm going to turn off automatic synchronization. I'm going to choose to start with installing my license on the primary, but you can also install the license on the secondary first. The reason I'm going to choose to install on the primary first is that because the licenses cannot be independently activated, the secondary license does need to see a primary license periodically in order to be able to continue to provide full functionality. Before we move on, you will notice that I have 2 terminals connected. You'll notice that these terminals are currently licensed. If I go into the licensing on either ThinManager server, I'll notice that I'm currently using 2 of my terminal connection licenses because I've got those 2 terminals that are connected right now and running in this environment, right? So there's those two terminals, both connected. You can go ahead and shadow, they clearly both have an active license. So what we're going to do now that we've broken synchronization is I'm going to go up to the install tab on my first server. I'm going to hit the license mode and I'm going to switch that to FactoryTalk Activation. You'll see that I now obviously have no valid activations because I have not told ThinManager what to use. Next, I'm going to hit the licenses tab and I'm going to hit add activations. This is going to browse all available activations that I have. I can toggle whether or not I want to show only the ThinManager or all FactoryTalk activations. Here'd be the license that we just went ahead and downloaded. This is the one created here on the 3rd of February, 2022. There's the 8 licenses. I could specify even more granularly at this point how many I wanted to pull into this system. Let's say I was using a centralized remote or a remote activation server. I could use multiple ThinManager hosts or ThinManager installations pointed at the same FactoryTalk activation server. So here's where I could say I only want this ThinManager server to consume 3 of my 8 licenses. In this case, I've only got one redundant pair of ThinManager servers, so I'm going to consume all 8 that we've already specified, and I'm going to go ahead and install those onto RDS1. Similarly, on our secondary remote desktop server, I see that I have my 8 FactoryTalk vFlex licenses here. These are the SEC, as we indicated, for the secondary server. What I'll do again is go to licenses. You'll see here this particular server is still set to ThinManager master license. So we go ahead and toggle that to FactoryTalk Activation. We go ahead and install my licenses from this FactoryTalk Activation server that's locally installed here. I will go ahead and hit OK. The next thing that we can do is we can go ahead and bring our synchronization back online. Before we do that, we can check to see that the activations are valid. Notice that once FactoryTalk Activation is installed, I can check to see the status of the license consumption on either my primary or my secondary server. Once the synchronization has been completed, you'll see I can come in here, I can look on either server, and I'll see that on my licenses, I have the 8 FactoryTalk vFlex licenses for ThinManager installed. However, I haven't consumed any yet. Now again, remember my terminals are still here, they're still functioning and running, but when they booted, they consumed a ThinManager license, right, from the previous licensing model. So right now they are still technically consuming that other, that ThinManager activation. If I come back to my primary server, you'll notice here as well that if I toggle that licensing mode back to ThinManager master license, that ThinManager master license has not been deleted or uninstalled in any way. We're just choosing to use the other activation model. So if I need to, I always have that capability to switch back while that activation is still current for the version of software that I'm using. Please note that if you are taking part in the FlexForward commercial conversion, you will no longer be entitled, once you have converted your license from ThinManager Activation to FactoryTalk Activation, you'll no longer be able to use your ThinManager Activation to install new versions of the software. So again, we've seen that at this point we have the activations installed. The terminals were still booted onto the previous activation. The way I can get them to install a new license will be at some point to go out and do a power cycle of that terminal, get it to re-deliver the firmware to that, get ThinManager to re-deliver the firmware. When it re-delivers the firmware, we'll pick up the new license. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll restart my my single display terminal that I've got sitting here. That terminal will go ahead, get its firmware from ThinManager server. We'll let that boot itself up. When it does, what we'll notice is that it's going to reach out and ask for the license, like all terminals do on boot. This time it's going to pick up one of those FactoryTalk activations from our server. So we'll be able to see once this terminal goes through its full boot process, I'll be able to come back here and watch the FactoryTalk activation be consumed. Now that the terminal has gone through its full boot process, we'll be able to come back into ThinManager and visualize on the Licenses tab that we have in fact consumed the FactoryTalk activation for each of those terminals that has now been booted against the new license. This concludes our demonstration on how to migrate from ThinManager Activation to FactoryTalk Activation in a redundant online and running system. Thank you.